Okay, so next up we have Phil on the Agnew station. Phil, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So I would go ahead and get started here. Let me go ahead and share something, and we will share my screen here. It's a model of the Agnew station, or as it was occasionally called the Agnew station. One of the things that makes this very interesting is this was the railroad stop for what was called the Great Asylum for the Insane. It was actually known as the Agnew's Development Center, and it was actually California's largest asylum for the insane. So for many years, if you had a crazy aunt or uncle, you would go to visit them taking the train to the Agnew station. So this is actually what the station looked like. This was taken actually about a year and a half ago. I'll show you some pictures. It was just recently repainted into SP colors. So it actually looks a little different than this. These are actually the South Pacific Coast colors. I actually did this in South Pacific Coast colors because I'm modeling California narrow gauge, actually south, and I actually changed the name of the station to a different name, but used this as the prototype model. So the station was actually built in 1877. Guy named Abraham Agnew actually owned the area. He donated 4 acres to the South Pacific Coast. They actually built the station there. The South Pacific Coast, if you're not familiar with it, was a narrow gauge railroad that ran from Oakland about 70 miles to Santa Cruz over the mountains, and was a very successful narrow gauge. It was actually taken over by the Southern Pacific. This station was transferred to the Southern Pacific in 1887. It was used for a number of years on the Southern Pacific lines that ran up and down the coast. When it was abandoned as passenger service went away, it was sold to the California Central Model Railroad Club in 1963. It is now a historic landmark, and it's actually right next to the tracks. And the tracks are fairly heavily used. This is where the Starlight runs, and where the California um, Capital Corridor trains that run up to San Francisco run past here, as does the ACE trains daily. So there's about probably 15 or 20 passenger trains that go past here, plus a number of freight. So it's on a fairly active railroad line. I got a couple of other pictures. These were pictures from the internet. So I started with a bunch of pictures from the internet. Again, they were taken when this was painted in the Southern Pacific, or excuse me, the South Pacific Coast colors. One of the things you'll notice from these pictures, if you look at the windows, you'll notice that the windows are not really windows at all. Um, in fact, they're solid. And the reason for that is this was purchased by a model railroad club. And if you go inside, it doesn't really look much like a station anymore. It is very much a model railroad that is a model railroad of essentially the SP from the Bay Area up to Oregon. So if you notice in the background there at the bottom left, that's Mount Shasta you see up there in the backdrop. And it's a very nice railroad. They are very operations oriented and do a lot of operating sessions. Very nicely done. Though if you notice, if you look in these pictures, notice that that waviness is not in the slides. The waviness you see there across the building is actually in the building. And you'll notice that there's no visible foundation. So the building has actually been settling into the ground for a number of years. And the comment from the club is that the layout benchwork now actually supports the building. And the only reason the building doesn't fall down is because of the benchwork. Uh, I also found from the SPC, this is the Society for Preservation of Carter Railroad Resources, a group here that really focuses on Carter brothers who built a lot of the narrow gauge cars in the early days of narrow gauge in California, including for the South Pacific Coast. They have an archive, and I was able to get from their archive some pictures, and these were pictures of the station. You notice on the left, it was called Agnew's, the possessive of the town that was there because it was considered Agnew's. Later, they dropped the S and it just became Agnew. The station on the left is an earlier picture. You'll notice that the ticket window is Alex on the outside. On the picture on the right, they've added in essentially a vestibule there that's off of the office and the dispatcher area or the station agent area. The model I did is based on the one on the right. So I thought I'd start by just showing a couple of pictures. So this is the picture you saw at the bottom left, kind of what I was trying to recreate, and this is the model of the station. One of the things you might notice is, and I'll talk about this in a moment, it was a little compressed to fit into the space I had available on the layout. It compressed in length, not in width or height. I kept those pretty much the same. Um, One of the things about this kind of a model is I really think an interior really fits it. So you can kind of see the interior there that was added in. Obviously, that was not based on anything prototypical because it doesn't exist anymore. And it turns out there aren't a lot of pictures of that kind of thing. These are a few more pictures of it. Again, trying to get that real flavor of it. I didn't try to make it very sway back. Didn't think that really was appropriate. So um, this is actually how it goes on to the module. So one of the first things is that this is going on to a module where it's not necessarily a module that's designed to be taken to shows. This is much more of a large fixed module, but did the same thing. And Tom has talked about this on his buildings is if you notice the building is actually built on a base. And what I've done is when I built the module, I laid out where I was going to build buildings and went ahead and cut either masonite or plywood. I'm kind of agnostic about masonite or plywood. They're both dimensionally very stable. What you do is basically I've taken those and wrapped them in cellophane, the stuff you get from Costco in the big rolls, and then taped that on, and then taken those and screwed them down. If you kind of notice right here, there are a couple of just drywall screws. You can see the holes over here. What that does is holds these wood pieces down, and then I tend to use Sculptamold. I use Homabed underneath the rails, and I run the Sculptamold up to it because narrow gauge didn't tend to have a lot of ballasting humps on the railroad. What you're seeing on the left is before the rails were painted. What you see on the right is after the rails were painted and in the process. And what this does is it lets you very easily just pop the building in, and then eventually, if you want to move it for a future application, move it out. So makes it fairly easy. Um, so the first thing to do if you're doing this kind of a build is to, and luckily had the building readily available, I could drive to it, was I prepared to go out and do a field visit. So what I did first, and you guys have seen, I tend to use PowerPoint for a lot of these things, is did a drawing of the building and then added in PowerPoint a bunch of places where I knew I wanted to get dimensions. This let me print this out, put it on a clipboard, take it with me, and go down and do the measurements. And that let me actually then get those measurements and put them back onto the drawing. One of the things that I found very interesting, if you haven't done this on your iPhone, there's actually a measuring tool. It's one of the standard applications that comes on an iPhone. I was going to try to demonstrate it, but it becomes almost impossible to do here. But if you have an iPhone, look for your measuring tool on your iPhone, open it up, and what you'll find is you get a picture with a little dot on it, and you can move that dot to a location, click the button, and it'll actually start measuring from that location. And then you can just walk, and when you click it again, it will actually do the distance. But as you walk, you can actually look at it as it changes. So if you look here, making this measurement from this wall right here, I'm assuming everyone can see my mouse pointer, making the measurement from this wall going this way to get these dimensions is actually really easy. You just start with your phone, click it right here, just walk, point it at the edge of the window there and say, oh, that's 5 feet. Walk a little bit further, point it here, oh, that's 13 feet. Walk a little bit further to this end, oh, that's 24 feet. Walk out here, there's a divider on the wall right there, that's 29 feet 4 inches. So if you haven't gone out and tried measuring, I actually had a tape measure with me and I was going to use it, and I found I didn't need a tape measure at all to do these measurements. It was really easy to do with the phone and do it. I did miss a few key measurements on here. You notice I didn't get the measurements up here of this upper little wall segment, the dormer. I ended up having to take the measurements of that off of the photos. I had enough measurements for the photos, and you'll see that in a couple of minutes. It was easy to get those measurements off. Um, so what that let me do then was I transferred all the measurements to a drawing, and I had now an accurate drawing of the building. And you notice the building is 57 feet long. It's only 14 feet wide, so it's a very narrow, thin building. You kind of think about that from a club perspective. They've got a full model railroad club in a building that's 57 by 14. It's a fairly small space. Um, what I realized was that that wooden board that I had built for where this was going to be located, which I actually did before I actually did the design of the building, was 12 inches wide. So I could not do a 57-inch building in O scale. I was going to be limited to something less than 48 inches. So, or 48 feet. So what I decided to do was take the prototype that was 57 feet and go ahead and change the dimensions on that to reduce it to 47 feet in length. And I decided to do interiors in the waiting and office and not the baggage room. And I did that for three reasons. One, I didn't think it would have a big impact. Two, I was lazy. And three, I wanted a place to bring wiring up for the other lighting, and it was going to make it a lot easier. When we get into the lighting section of this, which will probably be in the third or fourth section installment, you'll see how I did the lighting. And I just used the baggage area as the place to bring the wires up to support the lighting in the office and the waiting room. Um, what I ended up doing was I ended up keeping the dimensions of the office just about the same. Decided that when you looked at the office, that was where there was going to be some furnishings and that if I shrank it down, it would start looking unrealistic. I then therefore took and shrank both the waiting room and the baggage room. And you can see down here kind of the percentage that I shrunk those by. So I took the majority of the compression, so to speak, out of the baggage room and then a chunk out of the waiting room and very little out of the office. And again, as I knew I'd have enough room in the waiting room to put a nice, a nice bench in it, a nice waiting bench, and have some people sitting in there, have a ticket window. And I was just going to close the baggage room up, so making it a little bit smaller, I didn't think would be a real problem. So basically, at the same time that I was doing the measuring, I also took some photos. And one of the things that's interesting is that in the time from when all the internet photos were taken and when I went to take photos, the club actually repainted the building into SP colors. So these are pretty much standard Southern Pacific colors, which, quite frankly, probably were the colors the station was painted in for most of its life. But again, from my perspective, I wanted to use the colors of the South Pacific coast. This gave me the opportunity to get some additional pictures of the building, some accurate pictures that I could use for any dimensions that I didn't get while I was on site. But it also let me begin to take more pictures for clarity than I was able to find on the internet. And as I built the building to be able to see how they were. One of the things, for example, is I was taken by this stovepipe here, which was actually for a heater. But if you notice back on the historical photos, that didn't exist. That was something that was added on fairly recently. So I ended up deciding not to use that, even though I took some photos of it. The other thing that is very intriguing about the building is it does have some architectural details on it. The first thing is that it has above every window and door, there's essentially a fireplace mantle. I thought this was very interesting that basically what they were doing was building fireplace mantles. And if you ever build a fireplace mantle, you know how you cut the corners and build it up out of layers of trim. These window casings on the top are cornices where they would be called are all done exactly the same way. And then they have some pretty interesting supports under the eave for the roof. The roof does extend out quite a way. It's obviously in California where you have a lot of summer heat. And then there's these architectural details on the upper left there, which actually were lightning rods that went up through the roof, but those have been cut off at some point when they redid the roof and eliminated them. So that gave me basically a pretty good view of how to do that. I used, again, some of the drawings laid out with the links and stuff on them to be able to get all the sizes of these different pieces, be able to lay them out. And what I realized as I looked at this is, if you notice on there, there's a tissue window, and I started looking at trying to use commercial products. And what I realized was that the commercial products were not, there was nothing made that really matched what had been done on the building. And trying to add on to the commercial products to add those pieces on the top was going to be a pretty big challenge. So my conclusion after looking at that was that the only way to really model this was to do all those architectural details. When you look at like a window that looks like this or a door, to go ahead and do those, design them, and print them in resin in 3D. I have a friend, Fran Foley, Foley Locomotive Works. He does a lot of resin printing, and he generally agrees to help me when I have a smallish job like this. So, really the next step in this project was to take each of those elements and, for example, a window, and redesign it in CAD and design it in CAD as a single piece. Notice this is a window. This is the backside where it goes through the wall. The door does the same thing. It's actually got a door on the inside because it made it easier to print. This is the window on the end, the little dormer window on the baggage room that's up high. And you notice it's got bars on it, and those bars were actually designed into the print. This is the window for the dormer up above. Um, the ones that were really, I thought, pretty challenging was doing the bay windows. So, I had the two pictures you see here of the location where the bay windows were. And it was clear that what they had at one point was trim boards that ran vertically through where the windows were. And then the windows actually sat in that area. So, what I ended up doing was designing these are, again, 3D printed windows where the window frame doesn't have the trim in the middle. It's open so you can run the board through it and up along. And when you see the actual construction, you see that that's the way it worked. So, the key here to making this work was to take what was there and retranslate it into something that you could build, and then use a combination of real wood. So if you look at this, the siding here is Northeastern scribe siding. This is scale wood. I think these are probably 1x6s or 6x2s in O scale. And then the window here, the window frames are actually 3D printed and sit in between them. So I think it came together pretty well. Again, it's really just taking what you have. The designs here were done in FreeCAD. No matter which CAD program you use, it's not really a huge challenge to take the windows and turn them into something you can produce. Same thing for the details. So this is the lightning rod. It goes through a hole in the roof. The way it was installed was actually to drill a hole in the roof, and it's printed as a single piece that's got the part that you see visibly below the roof, as well as the lightning rod that goes through the roof. Also did the same for these eave supports. They were printed as individual little pieces. On the end of them right here, there's actually a hole. You can't see it. That was designed so you could put a piece of wire into it, and it would then screw. You could drill a hole into the wall, and it would screw and hold into the wall. And that was just gluing these onto the surface of the wall. I knew they wouldn't be very secure. By putting them on with a wire and holding them in, they're much more secure. So basically, that's what I wanted to get through today. Just getting you to the point of kind of where these prints were. So this got all the detail parts printed. Next time we'll go through laying out and cutting the walls, choosing the paints for the walls, a little bit about the wall bracing, the exterior wall finishing, and then the interior. And I didn't show the pictures long enough. We'll show them a little bit more. The interior is all printed as a separate install, and I'll walk through how those were put together and installed. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Tom.
What a fantastic model and a prototype at that. I think it's fascinating that the colors that you're modeling are the really were the temporary colors, because I think you're saying that it was originally the Southern Pacific colors, yeah?
Well, it was originally the original colors, the ones that I modeled here, and then it was painted in Southern Pacific later.
Oh, I thought it was on off on off. No.
Okay.
And it's interesting that I understand that a sane asylum is where the hosts of new track modelers
Yep. Ends up.
eventually wind up. So at least I know what station to get off of. Okay, well, thank you, and we'll see you next week on this.